Hello and thank you for joining us today. In this meeting, I want to ask you the questions about the major challenges that Vietnam economy and Vietnam government have to face in the transition into a medium income country.
The most important immediate challenge is macroeconomic stability. Because of the very rapid growth in credit boom in the last 4 years, started off as a price of success of Vietnam joining the WTO, great confidence from foreign investors. So we had a lot of foreign capital coming into Vietnam, and hence started a credit boom.
Yes.
The problem with credit booms is that they seldom end well
Yes.
for banks and for corporations. And that is the issue. That is the immediate challenge, is to stabilize the economy and to revitalize and make more resilient the banking sector. But in the medium and longer term, I think the improvement in productivity is really important. Vietnam is moving away from being an agriculturally based economy to a manufacturing based economy. We are getting on to the first steps of the production networks of East Asia. And it is very important not to be stuck at the bottom of this network. So education, infrastructure, all these major investments in human capital and physical capital would be necessary so that Vietnam can move through this middle income and develop viable industries, brand name industries, to move beyond the middle income.
Yes. In comparison with some other countries in the region and in the world, so Vietnam is in which stage of the transition into the medium income?
Vietnam is at the starting stage, yes. It has a lot of strengths. It's got a young population and generally a well-educated population. But that education has to be built on. It cannot just be general literacy. It has to then progress to more technical education. You want the innovators, you want the IT experts, you want the top engineers and so forth. We have your government, Vietnam's government has been very wise in investing in scholarships, so that you do have quite a good cohort of economists now in Vietnam. And they are running the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Planning and Investment. You have very famous economists. But then you also need to release the capital for the private sector. And that is why state-owned enterprise reform is very important in the medium to longer term.
So it is a strength in Vietnam, of Vietnam economy, right? So what about the weaknesses?
You have weaknesses in implementation of your laws, the judiciary system, the court system have to be strengthened. You have bankruptcy law, which came into existence almost 20 years ago, but it is not sufficiently well enough implemented. Right? You have institutions like the State Securities Commission, which overlooks the equities market, the share market, right? But there's not enough disclosure of information from private firms and so on. So it is the enforcement and implementation of laws that is a weakness.
In the transitions of the economy, Vietnam government is carrying out the restructuring process. So in the restructuring process, there is a lot of fields need to be restructured. So what do you think should be the priority of Vietnam government in the restructuring process?
I think the restructuring of the banking sector is important, right? And in that, time is of the essence, because you do not want panic to start. Because once panic starts, then you cannot rely on private sector solutions. The government has to step in, has to recapitalize, and it becomes very, very expensive. We have seen, for example, in Indonesia, in the Asian financial crisis, when the crisis started, only about 8% of Indonesian banks were had non-performing loans, were about 8% of banking assets. But as soon as the panic started, the companies started defaulting, and non-performing loans engulfed the whole banking system, and it cost the Indonesian taxpayers up to 50% of their GDP for that year to restructure the banking system. So I think that the urgency is to restructure the banking system. But having said that, I think that building up the quality of Vietnam's public institutions is also important. That means building up the major macroeconomic institutions such as the State Bank, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning and Investment. And I know that Vietnam, I have said earlier, Vietnam has already invested a lot of scholarships in educating economists. I think that has to be strengthened, and also public administration generally, not just economists, but lawyers, accountants, public servants generally.
But what will be the main difficulties in the banking restructuring process in Vietnam economy?
I think that Vietnam has been very lucky so far that with this big credit boom, that the banks have proved rather resilient, right? So I think the important thing is to move quickly now, and I'm very glad to hear of the Prime Minister's announcement a couple of weeks ago that this process is in fact happening, because time is of the essence here in order to minimize the fiscal cost in this restructuring.
Right. Thank you very much.